Hi, I'm Steve from the Stonecrafting Workshop. Welcome. I'm going to try something on a tumble that's slightly different. Here in the UK we use mostly silica carbide grits, but you can get aluminium oxide grits. So what I've done, I've picked out a selection of stones from my local beach, and they're a bit of a mixture. Some of them are very rough and some of them are very smooth. Generally what they have in common is that they are translucent. I think they'll be translucent when they're polished. These are wet, by the way. I've simply washed them off so you can see the colour of the stones as I put them in the barrel. And one or two of them are opaque, but just gorgeous colours. But as I say, what's going to be different is I'm going to use aluminium oxide grit and see how it works. Because aluminium oxide grit is much cheaper than silicon carbide grit. So I'm expecting it to take longer and maybe use a little bit more grit, but we'll see. It's going on my National Geographic rock tumbler, and there's a mixture of sizes, as you can see. Some of them are going to take, like that one is going to take quite a lot of tumbling. And I've also put some small filler stones in, just small pieces, just to aid the movement in the barrel. And I'm going to put the same amount in as I would if I was using silica carbide. So I'm going to put 2 tablespoons of aluminium oxide 80 grit powder. This should be fun. So this is our aluminium oxide experiment. It's been running at the 60 grit, no, I tell a lie, at the 80 grit aluminium oxide grit rather than the silica carbide grit. And how's it looking? Well, the slurry is nice and smooth and is sticking to the stones, which is what you want, but at the same time liquid enough to provide lots of movement. So let's just turn these out and we'll have a look at what they look like so far. They've been running for 14 days, by the way, which is a long time. I got a bit busy. So these are the stones from our aluminium oxide experiment, or test, to see whether aluminium oxide will polish just as well as silica carbide. The difference between the two is the silica carbide, they're both got the same hardness on the Mohs scale of 9, but the silica carbide is sharper and much more aggressive. And I think that shows in this batch. Some of them are done really well, beautifully finished, lovely smooth finish. You'd almost think that was a 220 finish. But some of the rougher ones need quite a bit more. But then I would expect that as well if I was running this experiment on silica carbide. I'd expect to run at the first stage for at least 2 goes and maybe more. So let's put these back, and I'll take out the ones that don't need to go back and put them to one side, and I'll try and find some stones to top up the barrel with. So these have been now running in the aluminium oxide 80 grit for about 3.5 weeks, and I changed the grit 3 times, and some of them are starting to look really nice, really pretty. And they're pretty much ready to move on to the 220 grit stage. This one I'm not going to put on to the next stage. It's a pity, it's a nice piece of stone and it is translucent, but it needs another turn. But also it's created these big holes have suddenly appeared, and I'm not going to continue with that one, but I'm going to go through them one at a time. Some of them are very pretty. That one again could do with more, but it just seems to get rougher as you go down. There's one really pink one, look at that. Is that pretty? So I'm looking forward to seeing that polished. And some of these are very definitely translucent. You can even see this weak light. It's not a very good torch, this one, and you can see it through it. Very nice. There's one or two like that. So 3.5 weeks on the 80 grit, using 3 lots of 80 grit, and it's ready to move on to the 220 grit. So, or 240 grit aluminium oxide. So we're all ready to go. I put all the stones in from the colander, and I also added the stones that I put on one side during the 80 grit process, and we're back up to about 2/3 full, which is a nice sort of level. I've put 2 heaped teaspoons of the 240 grit aluminium oxide and topped it up with water just to below the level of the stones. So we'll now proceed. I'll probably have a look at these in a couple of days' time just to make sure the mix is nice. And I'll see you in about a week's time. So this has been running now for about 7 or 8 days on the 240 grit, and you can see the slurry is perfect thickness, really thick enough to carry the grit. So let's wash these out and have a look at them and see how well it's doing. So here they are. They're looking pretty nice. I've taken a few out and dried them off, and I've looked at them under the loupe to give me an idea of how well they're polishing. And already, you know, we're at the 240 stage. They finished the 240 stage and they've already got quite a nice shine on them, look. I've noticed this before, that if you are quite thorough about your first 2 stages, you get through to the 40 grit, the 400 grit stage, and you know that you're already well on the way. So we're going to continue with aluminium oxide, and so that's the 240 grit. I've washed out the barrel. Now at this stage, at the 240 grit, once you go past the 240 grit stage, the washing out of the barrel and the stones has to be very thorough. These are all going back. I can't think of any reason not to. Look at that one. Look at the pink on that. Isn't that lovely? And that one. My wife and I have started actually collecting and hunting for pink stones on the beach because we so like the look of them, and you don't come across many, and it just so happens in this lot that I picked out fairly arbitrarily. There's still plenty of stones in there. They haven't lost enough bulk to need topping up, but at this stage what I'm going to do, I'm going to use 400 grit aluminium oxide, because I usually use 400 grit silica carbide, and I want to kind of replicate that process. And I'm just going to put 2 tablespoons of 400 grit aluminium oxide powder, a couple of spoons of borax powder, just to make sure the mix is nice and thick, or not thick but not too thin, let's put it that way. And I'm going to put in a spoonful of plastic beads, and these are the plastic beads I keep at my 400 grit stage. I only ever use these beads at the 400 grit stage, and I'm just going to put one, a piece of grass, look, I don't know, it won't matter. I'm going to put one in. Let's put 1.5 in of plastic beads, and then top up with water, not too much water. It's difficult to quantify because I have different sized barrels, so I don't know if you can see there, it's just coming up, so it's probably about, I'm just going to fill it up to about halfway up the barrel and no more than that, and then we'll put that on and we'll come back in a week's time and see how we're getting on. This is quite exciting, and so far I'm completely impressed by using aluminium oxide powder. I don't see much difference between using that and using silica carbide. Not much difference. So I'll see you in a week's time. And this is the 400 grit stage finished. And I just thought I'd have a look at these. I've dried them off. I know there's a theory that you shouldn't allow the stones to dry out. And the reason for that is that if you have a stone that has a crack in it or a hole that's holding the grit from the previous stage, it'll go hard and you won't be able to clean it out if you let the stones dry. But what I do is this. The stones will be here in the colander. The beads are floating on the top and I can hook them out easily after I'm finished. It's sitting in a bowl of very clean water, and I just take them out one at a time, having washed them all thoroughly, and dry them and check them over. And if they have a problem with them, I'll scrub them out at this stage, or I'll reject it. And out of this batch, I've actually got 2 stones I've decided not to put on to the polishing stage. I'll show you those in a second. I've just got these to finish off. And then we'll have a look. And the reason for drying them off is so that you can see the finish, which kind of matters a lot when you're doing a test of grits. As I say, I wanted to see if aluminium oxide was as good as using silica carbide. So there we are. These are the 2 that I'm not going to put on. You can see that's got quite a complicated hole and it's got the grit in it, and I'm not confident about getting rid of that, and it's not very nice anyway. And this one's the same. It's got a fairly complicated hole and I'm not totally confident about getting the grit out, so they can not. But this one, for instance, has a hole in it, and I've cleaned it out and brushed it out, so I'm confident that where they have holes I've cleaned them out. Now I'll put that to one side. Let's have a look at the stones. And at this stage I'm quite pleased. I'm going to check them with my loupe just to see what they look like, but they're all pretty smooth. And some of them actually have quite a nice polish on them already. And this is at the 400 grit stage. And this one in particular, on the highlights, on the ends, it's got a beautiful polish. You do get that sometimes. But certainly, there's no sense, I don't have any sense that this is an inferior finish to the silica carbide. No, they're very nice, very smooth, and definitely ready to go on to the polishing stage, which is a bit of a problem because the only aluminium oxide grit that I can get that's fine is a 1200 grit, and there's a really good rock tumbler called Rob, Northern Michigan Rocks, who says that 1200 grit aluminium oxide isn't fine enough for a polish. Well, in this country, in the UK, I don't seem to have any choice. So I'm just going to try it with the 1200 grit aluminium oxide and see what happens. If it doesn't polish, then I'll put it in with some like zinc oxide. Join me later when we have a look at the polished finish. So as I say, I'm now going to use 1200 grit aluminium oxide powder. So this is aluminium oxide 1200 grit. If any of you know anywhere in the UK where I can buy a finer grit than 1200 aluminium oxide, please let me know. But it does have the benefit of being cheap. It's much cheaper than any other polish. So I'm going to put 1.5 in for no good reason. What I do, I keep a log of everything I do on each tumble, purely so that I can look back and see what I've done and see what works and what doesn't work. Polishing beads. So I think 2 tablespoons of polishing beads. A tablespoon, bearing in mind this is only a £2 rock tumbler, £2 barrel. I'm just going to put a 1 tablespoonful of borax in. And I'll look at that tomorrow and see how it's all running. I can always add a bit more water or add a bit more borax tomorrow, depending on the thickness. And I'll put this on again for another 10 days, which is what I normally run a polish for. That's my kind of standard time for a polish, is 10 days. And of course I'll always do it for longer if it needs it. So come back in 10 days and let's see how this aluminium oxide 1200 grit has performed. So this is the transparent Hordle mix. They're from my local beach, and I've polished them from start to finish using aluminium oxide powder. The one hiccup has been in the polishing stage. Finished up using 1200 grade aluminium oxide powder, but and I looked at these, they were running for, I can't remember now, 10 days or something like that, and I looked at them and I was pretty disappointed. I thought there wasn't much improvement, and so I just bunged them on again. I had a project in hand that I needed to get on with, and they've been on for about another 10 days. I don't know if you can see that, but I've actually got a very nice polish now. Very nice. So what I'm going to do, let's wash these off and have a look and see how good it is. So there we are. This started out, this was an experiment to see if you could polish from start to finish using aluminium oxide grits and polish rather than silica carbide. The aluminium oxide is considerably cheaper and it's been okay. It's pretty good really. They've got a lovely polish, and I would say, you know, the 220 and the 400 grit aluminium oxide is going to work just as well as the silica carbide. The slight problem arises at the two extremes. I started out with 80 grit aluminium oxide, and it hasn't ground off the stones as well as I'd liked. I would do it more, and I think silica carbide definitely works quicker at the coarser grades. Having said that, I've actually just recently got some 40 grit aluminium oxide grit, which is a lot coarser, and I think that would speed up that end of things. Perhaps give it another few days and it might be a better result at that end. I think that would sort that out. The polishing stage, I used 1200 grit aluminium oxide because it was the finest I could get. Now that isn't a proper polish, it's not fine enough, but by leaving it in for quite a long time extra, it's actually worked out okay. They've actually got a really nice polish. Not the best polish I've ever got, but still very nice. And this is a lovely batch of stones. There's some really beautiful translucent stones here. So on the whole, I'm really pleased, and I'm going to persist in using. Look at that lovely colouring now, look. Isn't that beautiful? And this one, look, beautiful orangey pink. And there was one here I was really pleased with. Look at the pearly look on that. Sorry about my grubby fingers, I've been working this afternoon. Look at the beautiful pearly look of that. That's just a lovely stone. And some of these smaller ones, I deliberately put some small ones in so they're suitable for mounting on rings and what have you. Look at that, that's carnelian, I think. It's semi-translucent, a beautiful orange, really nice. So there's no reason at all why you shouldn't try out aluminium oxide powder and grits as one of the things you use for your rock tumbling. It's a lot cheaper than silica carbide. So thanks for watching. I hope you find this helpful. If you do, please give me a thumbs up. One of them. Where are we? Oh, there we are. There, one of them. And if you want to see more about rock tumbling and stone crafting, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.